How you doing? U.S. history. Kind of awkward, kind of weird, but I'm gonna start taping my lectures and putting them on Google Classroom so you guys could watch them. So hopefully you guys are all safe out there and everything's going well. I'll miss having you guys in class, but I'll give you directions on what to do, and if we take tests online, we'll do whatever. There's a lot of people in this situation, so I'm just going to try to make the best of it. And thanks for tuning in. So without further ado, let's start things up. We're going to start chapter 25 here. Minimize myself here so you don't have to look at my ugly face. Okay, so we're going to talk about chapter 25. The title is America Moves to the City. So we've talked a lot about Americans moving westward out to the country and out to the west to take advantage of cheap land, but there's also a number of people who are moving to the city, whether those people are unsuccessful Westerners or because they couldn't make it out there, it's too hard, or they could be immigrants coming in. And birth rate, so the numbers in the cities are going up. So people are drawn to the cities for a number of different reasons. And but I think the biggest reason would be the last one, jobs. That's where you can get a job. I mean, it was hard for people to move west and get jobs. You had to move west and be able to buy land. Occasionally, you could catch on a job on a farm somewhere, but it was much easier to find a job if you went to the cities. When you were there, you saw things like electric cars, and not electric cars like Teslas, but electric cars that are more like trolleys that you would see in San Francisco. You would see high rises that you would never, of course, see out west, electricity that they didn't have, indoor plumbing as opposed to having an outhouse, and then shopping like Sears, Montgomery Ward's, Macy's. They're all stores that came around during the latter half of the 1800s. So we'll be discussing that. So when it comes to skyscrapers, what really allowed skyscrapers to come to be was steel, the Bessemer process. We talked about it in the last chapter, the cheap way to make steel by burning impurities out of iron ore and getting steel. That allowed these skyscrapers to grow, much higher than the normal 3-4 stories that you could do with wood, and then it wouldn't be structurally sound if you went any higher than that. But with a steel skeleton structure, you're able to go high, and the sky was the limit, and that's why they're called skyscrapers. So there's some buildings in Chicago. If you ever want to see a city that has rich architecture that goes back for many, many years, visit Chicago. Great architecture tour there along the Chicago River. The Brooklyn Bridge. The building of the Brooklyn Bridge was huge. I mean, it was such a big architectural feat, and it was 1883 when it was completed, and the New York boroughs of Manhattan and Brooklyn were linked together, and the Brooklyn Bridge still stands strong today. It was actually the first steel suspension bridge erected in the United States. It was built at a cost of $16 million and 26 lives of people that die from the bends because they're underwater or under pressure of water for such a long time, and it messes with the nitrogen in your blood, and then also accidents that happen because it was dangerous building these bridges. So you could see just an explanation of a suspension bridge there. You could see the pillars on the side. That bridge would be much more structurally sound if you had a pillar in the middle. But the cost of building a pillar in the middle would be prohibitive, and the amount of lives that you'd be putting at risk would be huge because it's deeper there in the middle. So what they did is they suspended that spanway there and then held it up with those, you could barely see them, but they have steel cables, thousands of steel cables that hold up that span, and that enables you to build your pillars on either side where it's more shallow. Still, they had to go and dig underwater in what they called caissons, where they suck out all the water, and people would actually go down there and physically dig down below. For the bridge to be structurally sound, the pillars had to go twice as deep as they are high. So you can imagine how difficult and time consuming it was to build a suspension bridge like that. Of course, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Bay Bridge, those are suspension bridges also. And there's the longest suspension bridge in the world. It's in Japan. And you could probably get a better view from looking at that picture right there. It's a massive bridge. Now, of course, they don't have people go down and dig the pillars anymore. Their hydraulics will do it, and machines, and there's no people going down there at risk. Barges help. You have barges that go out there. That's an example of the trolleys that you would see, very much like something you'd see out of San Francisco. With all these people coming to the cities in large numbers, it presented a problem, and the problem was slums. That was one of them. The slums that developed, the crime that happened there, the filth from living in those closed quarter conditions, the stench that went along with it because of all the garbage that was produced, the diseases, the dumbbell tenement houses that we'll talk about, and then political machines, which we've talked about before, where millions of dollars would be stolen from the city and then redistributed to the poor people to get these men elected over and over again. So it was a machine. Once it started, you couldn't stop it. We had a discussion on that in the last couple chapters. You could see some of these pictures here that depict life in the slums. Some horrific pictures here. You see the picture on the left there of the kids that are huddled around a grate for warmth. I mean, they can't be more than 4, 5, 6 years old. This is an example of a dumbbell tenement house. Think about it if you're standing over the dumbbell rack and you're looking down at the dumbbells. So you have your handles there in the middle. And they were lined up one after the other for miles and miles and miles. And they're very small, closet-like rooms that many people lived in. They jammed as many people into these small places as they possibly could. It was, believe it or not, an award-winning design to house as many people in a small amount of space as possible. And they'd go up very high. The kids that lived in amongst the dumbbell tenement houses would rarely ever see the light of day. They were things like the Boys and Girls Club of America was created to take kids out of the inner city slums in places like New York and Chicago and take them out to the different places where there were trees. Like they would, some of these kids would never see trees or grass ever if you lived amongst these buildings. The schools were in there. There were small stores in there that they could go to, but it was a pretty miserable existence for the most part. You had immigrants. The two periods of immigration in the United States history, two major periods. There's other more common modern day periods also, but the two that we study in here in this class is old immigration and new immigration. Old immigration is up to 1880. So it goes all the way back to 1607. I guess you could consider the first ship coming over, first successful colony in the United States, Jamestown, 1607. The beginning of immigration goes all the way up to 1880. Most of the immigrants during that time came from the British Isles, came from Great Britain, from England, and the Western European countries like Germany and places like that. They were they were white, and they were Anglo-Saxon, and they were Protestant, and they were fair-skinned. They generally came from democratic countries. They were educated, and they were able to find decent jobs. Now, we've talked about the Irish and what they experienced when they first came over here and the discrimination. But by the time 1880 rolls around, the Irish are ones that have the good jobs, and they're the ones that are actually oftentimes discriminated against the new immigrants. So then we enter a period of new immigration, which is the period we're studying right now, from 1880 to about 1930. 1930 is a marker year because in the 30s is the Great Depression, and you're going to get very little movement over to the United States from other countries. So in 1880s to 1930, most of the immigrants came from Southern and Eastern European countries, like Italy, like Greece, like Poland, like Russia, like Turkey. These countries had little democratic history. Oftentimes, those people coming here preferred the cities and preferred jobs at working in factories, and they oftentimes are accused of, you know, of bringing down wages, and they would be willing to work for low pay, so that anybody else who worked in the factory had to accept low pay, and there was a lot of anger directed at them. They generally lived exclusively, which means they lived in and amongst themselves, like in little Italies or German towns or Chinatowns. There was very little intermingling. We oftentimes like to talk about the United States as a melting pot. At this time, the melting pots were the schools, where kids would go to school with other kids from different countries, and to really, help create what we know as America today, which is very diverse. Not much diversity in some of these cities where the immigrants were coming in. Here's a great picture I really like. Obviously I'm Italian, and I have family that came over from Italy, and the first place they went was New York, and I could see possibly some of my own family members living in, and they actually did live in this area here of Little Italy in New York. And it's colorized. It's a black and white photo, and that someone has colorized it, but very crowded, a lot of produce there. Looks like a very vibrant place in New York. We talked about the political machines that would dominate this time period, and it's not going to be to the progressive era that they're going to, chip away at the corruptness that political machines brought, along with a lot of other corruption too. A safe haven, a safe place for kids to go, was created by a reformer by the name of Jane Addams. Jane Addams was college educated. When she graduated, she went on a trip to Europe, and when she was there, she saw something that wasn't very common in the United States, and that was educated people working with kids, trying to make their lives better. Kids especially that were poor and lived in the slums. And remember, the Industrial Revolution came to Europe way, way earlier than came to the United States. So there was definitely slums there that were worse than the United States. So educated people working with kids and helping them out. So she brought that idea to the United States. And she was gifted this house by a man by the name of Hull. His last name was Hull, and she named it after him, called it the Hull House. And it was the start of settlement houses, safe havens, safe places that kids could go. Kind of like the Boys and Girls Club, a place that kids could go after school, free, didn't cost anything, activities, games, books, learning, as opposed to just going home to a dirty slums and tenement houses. So really generated a lot of support from the local businesses who supported her. And then you see here the room, how tidy and nice and clean, which is very uncommon for kids to see that. And they did a lot of things there. It was a political, they promoted politics there as well, in the Hull House, because she would speak up for people who couldn't speak for themselves. Jane Addams did. Some pictures of things here, or why they settled these areas. These pictures, I actually took these pictures, so shameless self-promotion of Mr. Carnazzo again. Here I am. We went on a trip to Chicago. We went to Wrigley Field. We did a lot of really cool things in Chicago. I told you about the architecture tour, but also I really wanted to get down to see the Hull House, and here I am at the Hull House, right in the room there. The earlier picture is very similar to it's taken in the same place as this picture here on the right. I'm in the corner right there where there's someone in the rocking chair. That's about where I'm standing. So kind of cool for me to see that place. And it's right next to the University of Chicago, a college that was funded by Rockefeller. We just got done last chapter talking about Rockefeller. So the Hull House was big. I'll save nativism for next lecture. So just wanted to thank you for tuning in. And this is lecture number 1. I promise you they'll get better than this one, I hope. as we go. And we're all in this together, guys. So stay safe. Thank you.